one and kind of kill two birds with one stone. You have a homework question, but if you would like more practice, I would retry number 4 of the notes. But this is 2x squared plus 7x plus 4 equals 0. And first thing, well, those of you who got here, what did you do first? Marin? Good, divide everything by 2. So that'll give us x squared plus 7/2 x plus 2 equals 0. What would be the next thing? Dax, keep putting it away. What would be the next thing to do from number 27? Minus the 2. Get rid of that so that we can go ahead and start completing the square. So we have x squared plus 7/2 x is equal to -2. Then we have to complete the square. So you take half of the middle term and square it. Since this is a fraction, instead of saying divide it by 2, taking half is the same as timesing by 1/2. So I'm going to take half of it and square it. If I take half of that, that'll become 7/4. If I square 7/4, you have to square the numerator and the denominator. So if I square 7, what's 7 squared? 49. If I square 4, what's 4 squared? 16. So I'm going to add 49/16 to one side, and then I have to also add it to the other side. Because it's the same as dividing by 2, and since it's a fraction, it would be easier to times it by 1/2. Then we need to factor it down. So as I'm factoring this down, the last term's positive. So I know I'm going to have the same sign as the middle term, plus and plus. X times x gives me x squared. What times what gives me 49/16? What times what gives me 49/16? We'll start with the numerator. What times what gives you 49? 7 and 7. Then look at the denominator. What times what gives you 16? 4. 4 and 4. So this is going to factor down into x plus 7/4 squared. Here's a nice little hint for you, or hopefully this is helpful. The number that goes here is always whatever you took half of, whatever came out when you took half. Then, as I add this off to the right, this is -2/1. You need a common what before you can add fractions? Denominator. So we multiply this by 16/16. Which would equal -32/16 plus 49/16. -32 plus 49 would give me 17/16. Okay, now I'm here. What undoes a square? Square root. So I'm going to square root. That undoes the square. And now I have x plus 7/4 is equal to, what do I need to keep in mind when taking a square root? Plus or minus. Furthermore, I can't leave a radical in the denominator. This is equivalent to the square root of 17 over the square root of 16. Here's the beauty of this number. What is the square root of 16? 4. So we do not have to rationalize the denominator here. It rationalizes itself because it was a perfect square. So this actually is the square root of 17/4. And last but not least, I need to get x by itself. So what undoes addition? Subtraction. So we're going to subtract 7/4 to both sides. And my answer is x is equal to -7/4 plus or minus the square root of 17/4. Now, because those have the same denominator, you could combine the numerators. So this is a valid answer, or you might see something like this, -7 plus or minus root 17/4. They're equivalent because the denominators are the same, so we can combine them. Margot. Square root of 17 over square root of 16? Becomes square root of 17/4. All right, guys, that was number 27 of the homework. Hopefully you had a good jump start on that first assignment. Hopefully you maybe even finished it. So tonight's homework will just be the quadratic formula. We are going to go ahead and finish these notes now. So if you could go back to your notes. Jay? Yes. We're going to go back to the notes and we're going to take a look at how to use the quadratic formula. Okay, if you really understand completing the square, if you were able to get number 27, either you were able to hear it and understand how it was performed, or you even did it on your own, then you could actually really understand where the quadratic formula came from. This was my original intent. I was going to do this one off to the left with you and then do it step by step with the equation on the right. The equation on the right represents any quadratic with coefficients a, b, and constant c. I'm going to start this with you, and then I'm just going to do a bunch of dots. I think we're still new at learning the completing the square process, so I don't want to overwhelm you, but I'm going to show you how I was going to originally walk you through this. So looking at the equation on the left, using the process of completing the square, what would you guys do first? Divide by 2, or you could say plus 5. Either of those would work. I'd probably divide by 2 first just to get rid of that coefficient. So that would leave me with x squared plus, what coefficient is in front of the x? 1. So I could call that 1/2 x minus 5/2. X over 2 is the same as 1/2 x, because if you think of taking 1/2 times x, if you would put x over 1, and so it would be x over 2. So they're just equivalent, but that's equal to 0. So in a similar fashion, if I did that exact same step to the equation on the right, I would divide everything by a, and I would get x squared plus b over ax plus c over a is equal to 0. If I took this all the way through and used the process of completing the square, I would get the answer that's in the notes. I don't remember exactly what it is, but I'd get the answer for x, just like we did in the homework. If you do that exact same process to this, which represents any quadratic, you would get the answer for x. You would get it in terms of a, b, and c. This is the answer that would come about. You would get that x is equal to the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all over 2 times the value of a. Has anybody seen that before? Yeah? Do we know what it's called? Jacob, do you know what it's called? No, but you've seen it before? Davis, do you know what it's called? That is the quadratic formula. It is the answer for x. And it is a formula that if you can identify your coefficients, like what's taking on the value of a, b, and c, you can just plug it into that formula and get the answer for x. Now, if you're interested in how do we get from here to here, it is in the completed notes. But I feel like this is so new, I don't want to overwhelm you guys with steps. So we're going to finish off this class with just practice using the quadratic formula. Now, the quadratic formula, you do have to have it memorized. Many people, when they first learn it to pop goes the weasel. So since not a lot of you raised your hand, I will show you how that works. You guys know the tune to Pop Goes the Weasel, like dun 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 dun. Well, if you put these values into that tune, this is the way most people learn it. It goes x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. That's the most common way people memorize it because they know that tune. And believe it or not, this can be really hard to memorize. There's like B's, A's, C's all over the place. So I would say if the tune helps you, just maybe try to put that in. It goes all over 2a. So that kind of helps you just, okay, I want to put this in and I would repeat that tune until you know this equation well. This equation is used all over the place in higher level math. everybody, no matter what major they take in college, has to take at least one math class. Usually it's a basic college algebra math class. What's your book called? College Algebra. So we're trying to help prepare you for a class that you could have in college. This you would see in your college class. The reason I'm telling you that, there's kind of a funny story about this college student. He was trying to pass his college level math course, and he could not memorize the quadratic formula. He had to retake the course, I think it was 3 times. And the third time he took the course, he told his fellow classmates, he said, if I don't know the quadratic formula this time around for this test, I'm going to tattoo it to my body. And everyone's like, okay, he's got to know it by now. Like, this is his 3rd time taking the class. Like, he has to be able to memorize it. And he took the test and he got the quadratic formula wrong. The funny thing about the story is he tattooed it to his back, which I commend him for in the aspect that he will never cheat because it's on his back. But I think it's a little funny that he put it on his back because I don't know how that will help you learn it. Like, you'll never be able to see it. Like, it's always on your back. So anyways, I just remember hearing that story and just being astounded that, like, holy cow, he would tattoo it to his body. But it's a formula you will need to know. You'll see it in college. It's so commonly used because it can solve any quadratic. Here's the way that the formula is officially known. If the equation is in this form, so if you have ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, it doesn't matter if the quadratic is factorable. It doesn't matter what is true of the quadratic. If it's in that form, then x can always be found by plugging in the numbers into this equation. X is equal to negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You do have to have that memorized at some point. Just to let you guys know, it looks like we're going to be having the test next week, block day. So you will definitely want to have it memorized by then. But today we're going to practice using it. So stare at it for a second. See if now you can flip it to the other page and write it, or just right below it. See if you can remember it. How much of it can you remember right now? Write it right above number 1. If you want to know how the tune works, again, it goes x equals negative b plus or minus square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Has anyone heard it to that tune before? Raise your hand if you've heard it to that tune. Yes, 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 yes. Few people. Typically, when we learn this, it's taught to that tune, just because it's the easiest way typically for people to memorize it. All right, number 1. The first thing that is very important, other than knowing the formula, is what has to be true of the equation before you can use it. And if you look back at the box, what does the equation have to be equal to? Has to be equal to 0. So that's really, really important before we can use this formula. I'm going to go ahead and just write that in red. I'll do a little exclamation point. Set equation equal to 0 before using the formula. All right, you guys seem really tired here, and I really want to try to get you engaged, and you might be getting hungry because it's close to lunchtime. So let me go ahead and throw some candy, hopefully not at your head. Raise your hand if you could tell me. Number 1, what would I do first before I can use this equation? Mariah. Nice. Here you go, Mariah. All right, so we subtract it to both sides of the equation, and we get 3x squared minus 5x minus 1 is equal to 0. Can someone else raise their hand and tell me what are the values of a B, and C that we would use. A, B, and C. Marin. Nice. Close. Good. And C is awesome. -1. Nice. I'm not going to correct. All right. Now that we have A, B, and C, let's plug it into that formula. If you need help, look at what you wrote at the top. Hopefully it's correct. So we're going to plug this in to X equals opposite of B. So it's the opposite of -5 plus or minus the square root of B squared. So that would be -5 squared minus 4 times the value of A, which is 3, times the value of C, which is -1, all over 2 times the value of A, which is 3. And we go ahead and we start simplifying. So we need to remember our order of operations. Raise your hand if you can tell me, what is the opposite of a negative simplified to? Raise your hand, raise your hand. I want to throw candy at your head. No, I want to throw candy to you. Jack. Yes, positive. Opposite of negative is positive. I was kidding about the head. I actually don't want to hit you in the head because I feel bad. Right. See, I'm a horrible girl. I'm not calling girl fan. All right, so opposite of a negative is a positive, and then we have plus or minus the square root of -5 squared is 25. -4 times 3 is -12. What's -12 times -1? +12. Nice, all over 6. And then that would give me 25 plus 12 would give me 37. All over 6. So that's my answer for X. I would check to see, can I simplify the square root of 37? I cannot. That's a prime number. And so this would be my final answer. Davis. You leave it in simplest radical form. Good question. Although Davis brings up a really good point that you could check this in your calculator. So you could plug that in and see, does it work? Josh, do you have a question? Why would I take out what? Oh, good question. That's because these two are terms because of the plus sign. They're glued together. So I cannot separate them in taking the square root. I need to add them first and then take the square root. Great question. All right, on to number 2. Number 2, can someone raise their hand for a Jolly Rancher candy? And tell me, what would you do first in number 2? What would you do first? Dun, dun, dun. There's 2 steps, so I'll give out 2 candies. If you can tell me one of the steps. Michael, what would you do? Good, and then Josh, what else would you do? Subtract the 1, well done. They're exactly right. If you could do exactly what they say. Subtract 2x, subtract the 1. And that would give me x squared minus 2x minus 1 is equal to 0. Okay, another piece of candy. Can someone raise their hand and tell me, what is the value of A here? This is tricky. What is the value of A? Dex. Yes, he's correct. Mark it down. A is equal to 1 because there's nothing in front of the x squared. So that is exactly right. There would be a 1 in front. And then B is equal to -2 and C is equal to -1. So we go ahead and we plug this in. X equals -b, so the opposite of -2 plus or minus square root. Yes, you can. I'm just putting it in to show you how the formula works. Plus or minus square root -2 squared, because it's b squared, minus 4ac, which is 1 is a, c is -1, all over 2a. So 2 times 1. Because it's in the formula, it's minus 4ac. So I'm just using that formula for the minus 4. And now I'm going to simplify. So the opposite of -2 is 2, plus or minus the square root. -2 squared is 4. And then what's -4 times -1? +4, good. All over 2. And that will give me 2 plus or minus the square root of 8 all over 2. I'm going to have you pause and turn to your partner and tell them, what would the square root of 8 simplify to? Turn to your partner, see if you can tell them. Okay, 4. Sour punch for you and your partner. Raise your hand if you could tell me, what is the square root of 8? What does it simplify to? Tamikio. 2 square root of 2. So that would be you and Mariah, right? You guys are working together today? All right, well done, well done. So right now I have 2 plus or minus 2 root 2 all over 2. I'm almost done. So this is going to be 2 plus or minus 2 root 2 over 2. Now, remember, this is going to be a reminder. The number 2 here is a term because it has a plus next to it. We cannot reduce terms. We can only reduce factors. Those are numbers that have been multiplied. Now we do have a factor here. If I look at the numerator, they both have 2 in them. So I could factor that out into 2 times 1 plus or minus root 2, and this is still all over 2. Now the 2 has been multiplied, and you can reduce factors. So let me go ahead and write in, we can reduce factors. Those are numbers that have been multiplied. So now 2 divided by 2 equals 1. And my answer for x would be 1 plus or minus square root of 2. All right, and last but not least, number 3. Number 3, the first thing that I want to point your direction to is what this is equivalent to. If I have times x squared, I could say that that's the same as times it by x squared over 1. If this is times x, I could say times it by x over 1. And that means that this is the same as x squared over 10 is equal to 2x over 5 plus 1/2. Same thing. We've done questions like this in section P.8. How did we get rid of all of those denominators? Raise your hand if you know. What would I multiply both sides of the equation by to get rid of those denominators? Anyone know? What could I multiply this side and this side by? Fiona. 10. Well done, Fiona. We'll multiply this by 10 and this by 10. Now, when you multiply it, you're going to distribute. So I like to show, hey, I'm multiplying this by 10, so I times it by x squared over 10. I need to distribute this in, so that's 2x over 5 times 10 over 1, plus 1/2 times 10 over 1. And now we're going to reduce. So as I reduce this, the 10 goes into itself 1 time. So I'm left with x squared is equal to, how many times does 5 go into 10? 2, good. So I'd have 2x times 2 gives me 4x. Plus, what's 1/2 of 10? 5, nice. So we have x squared equals 4x plus 5. All right, I owe Fiona a candy. Can someone raise their hand and tell me what would I have to set this equation equal to, or what would I have to do first before I could use the quadratic formula now? Jacob. Good, subtract 4x and subtract 5. After you do that, I'd like you to turn to your partner. the person with the darker colored shirt on, you share what you'd plug in for A, B, and C of the quadratic formula. All right, if you're getting to the correct answer, your answer should be 5 and -1. 5 and -1. I was gonna have someone come up here and show their work if they got to that, but unfortunately, I think we get out at 07. Do you guys know? Is it 07? I'm afraid there might not be enough time. So we'll go ahead and plug this in together. X equals opposite of B, so that would be 4 plus or minus square root of B squared. -4 squared will produce a positive 16 minus 4 times A, which is 1, times C, which is -5, all over 2 times the value of A. And that'll become 4 plus or minus square root of 16 plus 20, all over 2. And that'll become 4 plus or minus square root of 36, all over 2. The square root of 36 is just 6. And so now that these are like terms, I have to go and evaluate, add them together. So I'd have 4 plus 6 over 2 and 4 minus 6 over 2. 4 plus 6 is 10. 10 divided by 2 would give me 5. And 4 minus 6 is -2. -2 divided by 2 is -1. So I get x is equal to 5 and -1. Now, this one we solved using the quadratic formula, but Monday I would have asked you to solve this by factoring. Let me quickly show you how you could have solved this by factoring. If I look at the last term, it's negative. So should I have the same or different signs? Different. X times x gives me x squared. -5 and 1. And if I set each of these equal to 0, I get x is equal to -1, and I get x is equal to 5. Which process do you guys think is easier, the one on the left or the one on the right? Some people say left, a lot of people say right. Tomorrow, we're going to lean in to see, well, how do I know which method to use? And that'll be it.